On the 14th of July, 1789, the mighty Bastille in Paris, a hated prison and symbol of the loathed royals that would soon lose their heads, fell to revolutionary insurgents. While only 7 inmates were inside at the time and the building had already been scheduled for demolition, its capture ignited the French Revolution. In a matter of years, Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette were arrested and shepherded toward the guillotine. France was now a glorious republic, the definition of liberty, equality, and fraternity that would go on to form the French Constitution, signed nearly half a century later. The scandalous behavior of the royal family and the aristocracy had been swept away, and a new France emerged. And yet, something dark would quickly follow. Amidst the chaos and fervor of the French Revolution, the period known as the Reign of Terror stands out as one of the most brutal and intense episodes in modern history. From 1793 to 1794, revolutionary France was engulfed in a wave of political executions, widespread fear, and radical societal transformation. The guillotine, a symbol of swift and relentless justice, claimed thousands of lives, including those of former allies and influential figures who had once shaped the revolution. The Reign of Terror was a time when ideological zealotry and paranoia overshadowed reason, leading to a devastating cycle of violence and retribution. The Reign of Terror was not merely a time of mass executions, but a period of extreme political upheaval and radical change that completely reshaped French society. Spearheaded by the Committee of Public Safety and figures like Maximilien Robespierre, the Terror aimed to purge France of its enemies and solidify the revolutionary government. It was terror in every possible sense of the word. The Reign of Terror can only be understood by examining the tumultuous context of the French Revolution. By the late 18th century, France was rife with social inequality, financial crisis, and widespread discontent with the monarchy. The Enlightenment had inspired new ideas about liberty, equality, and fraternity, which clashed sharply with the entrenched privileges of the aristocracy and the absolute power of King Louis XVI. The revolution exploded to life on July 14, 1789, with the storming of the Bastille, but this was merely the opening salvos of a conflict that would drag on for years. What followed immediately came to be known as the Great Fear, where a mixture of revolutionary fervor, misinformation, and fear of famine swept France, leading to a peasant uprising. This was followed by several insurrections that finally toppled the monarchy in 1792. The subsequent period saw the National Assembly's efforts to draft a new constitution and implement reforms, but internal divisions and external threats from monarchist Europe complicated those endeavors. Several key events set the stage for the Reign of Terror. The storming of the Bastille was followed by the abolition of feudal privileges and the declaration of the rights of man and of the citizen, which laid the ideological groundwork for a new democratic society. However, as the revolution progressed, tensions between different factions intensified. The execution of King Louis XVI on January 21, 1793, was a pivotal moment. The king's death marked the end of the monarchy and the beginning of the radical phase of the revolution. His execution was intended to demonstrate the revolutionary government's resolve to break with the past, but it also incited outrage and fear among monarchists and foreign powers, leading to the War of the First Coalition against France. In response to these mounting threats, the National Convention, the Revolutionary Assembly, established the Committee of Public Safety in April 1793. Initially intended to protect the revolution from internal and external enemies, the committee quickly gained extraordinary powers under the influence of leaders like Robespierre. Its mandate to maintain order and defend the revolution soon morphed into a justification for widespread political purges and executions, heralding the very onset of the Reign of Terror. As France plunged deeper into chaos, the committee's radical measures and the pervasive fear of counter-revolution set the stage for one of the darkest chapters in its history. The committee comprised 12 members, with Maximilien Robespierre and Georges Danton as the most prominent figures. Maximilien Robespierre emerged as the committee's de facto leader, a lawyer by profession and a fervent advocate of Rousseau's ideas, the French writer and philosopher who believed that forming a republic requires each citizen to surrender all claims of liberty and place all his powers under the supreme direction of the general will. Robespierre believed in the necessity of virtue and terror as instruments to achieve the revolution's goals. His influence grew rapidly as he promoted the notion that the ends justify the means of preserving the republic. Georges Danton, initially a more moderate revolutionary leader, also played a crucial role in the early days of the committee. Danton was instrumental in mobilizing the revolutionary fervor and advocating for bold actions against internal and external enemies. However, his more lenient stance towards perceived enemies eventually put him at odds with Robespierre. The committee wielded extraordinary powers, which included oversight of the military, foreign policy, and the judiciary. It could issue decrees, direct government policy, and supervise local officials. Essentially, it operated as the executive arm of the revolutionary government, centralizing authority to respond swiftly to threats. This concentration of power was justified by the need to protect the revolution from both internal dissent and foreign intervention. The Reign of Terror intensified with the declaration of the Law of Suspects on the 17th of September 1793. This draconian law expanded the scope of who could be considered an enemy of the revolution. The criteria for suspicion were broad and vague, encompassing not only those actively opposing the Republic, but also anyone who appeared indifferent or insufficiently enthusiastic about revolutionary ideas. The Law of Suspects allowed for the arrest of individuals based on mere suspicion, with little or no evidence required. Categories included former nobles, émigrés, those with ties to counter-revolutionary activities, and those who failed to display overt support for the revolution. This led to widespread paranoia and the breakdown of social trust, as neighbors or rivals could denounce anyone. The impact on French society was absolutely profound. The judicial process was subverted, with revolutionary tribunals established to expedite the prosecution of suspects. These tribunals often conducted summary trials, with the guillotine being the symbol of swift and inescapable justice. The climate of fear and suspicion permeated all levels of society as thousands were arrested and executed. These measures, driven by the revolutionary leaders' desire to protect their nascent republic, led to a period of unprecedented political repression and violence, fundamentally altering the course of the French Revolution and leaving an indelible mark on French history. The revolutionary tribunals played a central role in the Reign of Terror, functioning as the judicial arm of the Committee of Public Safety. Established in March 1793, these tribunals were tasked with expediting the trial and execution of suspected enemies of the revolution. Their proceedings were often swift and ruthless, characterized by the lack of proper legal defense and a presumption of guilt. These tribunals were notorious for their harshness and the minimal evidence required to secure a conviction. The accused were often subjected to show trials where the outcome was predetermined and the guillotine awaited almost inevitably. For 10 bloody, hellish months, terror engulfed France, and this is just the time when most historians can agree on what is considered the Reign of Terror. You can go a few years back and find countless gruesome examples. To complicate this whole story, in 1792, France found itself at war with Prussia and Austria, both of whom had threatened to destroy Paris if the royal family were harmed. At this point, the French army was a shambles, and the Austrian and Prussian armies easily pushed through defenses and began advancing toward Paris in August 1792. What happened next in the French capital left a dark stain that would prove to be a prelude to the Reign of Terror. Fearing that Austrians and Prussians would release prisoners in Paris, authorities took the shocking decision to begin executing them en masse. Between the 2nd and the 6th of September, around 1,600 prisoners, roughly half the prison population in the whole city, were killed. The massacres were reported in a few other French towns as well. In total, 65 to 75 incidents of mass executions were reported. By the time the Reign of Terror officially began in September of 1793, France was holding back the Austrian-Prussian tide, but at a high cost. Conscription was widespread, and the death toll on the battlefield continued to rise. One of the most brutal episodes of internal repression was the Vendée uprising. This counter-revolutionary revolt in the Vendée region was primarily fueled by resistance to conscription and religious persecution. The revolutionary arm, under orders from the Committee of Public Safety, conducted a ruthless campaign to quash the rebellion. This campaign included mass executions, widespread destruction, and what some historians describe as genocidal tactics against the Vendée population. From the winter of 1793 to the spring of 1794, violent repression was put in place by the Republican forces. In the cities, and in particular in Nantes and Angers, around 15,000 people were shot, drowned, or guillotined on the orders of revolutionary military commissions, while in the countryside about 20 to 50,000 civilians were massacred by soldiers who set fire to many towns and villages. At the same time, the Reign of Terror cast a wide net, ensnaring nobles, clergy, political opponents, and ordinary citizens alike. The The result was a climate of pervasive fear and suspicion, where personal vendettas and political rivalries could easily result in accusations of treason and a trip to the guillotine. The Revolutionary Army also enforced the de-Christianization campaign, which aimed to eradicate the influences of the Catholic Church in France. Churches were closed or repurposed, religious symbols were destroyed, and the clergy were persecuted. This policy further alienated segments of the population and contributed to internal resistance. One of the most high-profile executions was that of Marie Antoinette, the former Queen of France. After a highly publicized and sensational trial, she was convicted of treason and sent to the guillotine on the 16th of October 1793. Her execution symbolized the revolution's break from the old regime and its ruthless resolve, but it left a bad taste in the mouths of many. Another significant execution was that of Georges Danton, the revolutionary leader and once a close ally of Robespierre. Danton's increasing opposition to the excesses of the Terror led to his downfall. Accused of corruption and leniency towards some enemies of the revolution, he himself was executed on the 5th of April 1794. His death marked the height of the internal purging within the revolutionary ranks. The Reign of Terror saw an unprecedented number of executions. By the time it ended, in July 1794, it was estimated that over 17,000 people had been officially executed by guillotine. Additionally, tens of thousands more were killed without formal trials in the provinces. The fall of the Reign of Terror was precipitated by a series of events known as the Thermidorian Reaction, which began on the 27th of July 1794. The growing discontent with Maximilien Robespierre's increasingly autocratic rule and the relentless executions led to a convergence of opposition among the revolutionary leaders and the general populace. Fear and paranoia permeated the ranks of the National Convention, as many members feared they could be the next victims of the guillotine. The pivotal moment came during a session of the National Congress when Robespierre attempted to deliver a speech defending his policies and accusing various unnamed individuals of conspiring against the Republic. Instead of rallying support, his speech provoked a backlash. Sensing their opportunity, members of the convention, led by figures like Paul Barras and Jean-Lambert Tallien, called for Robespierre's arrest. That night, Robespierre and his associate were taken to the Hôtel de Ville in Paris by their supporters in an attempt to stage a counter-coup. However, forces loyal to the convention stormed the building, leading to a brief but intense firefight. Robespierre was found with a shattered jaw, having possibly attempted suicide or having been shot in the chaos. On the 28th of July 1794, Robespierre and 21 of his closest allies were executed by guillotine, effectively ending the Reign of Terror. The immediate aftermath of the Thermidorian Reaction saw significant changes in the French political landscape. One of the first actions taken by the new leadership was the release of prisoners who had been detained under the draconian measures of the Reign of Terror. This move aimed to signal a return to more humane and moderate governance. The Committee of Public Safety, which had wielded almost dictatorial powers during the Reign of Terror, was dismantled, its extensive powers curtailed, and its membership was drastically reduced. This dismantling marked a shift away from the radical policies that had defined the period and the end of the institutional mechanisms that had facilitated widespread repression and executions. Government policies also underwent substantial changes. The new leadership, seeking to distance itself from the excesses of the Terror, enacted measures to restore civil liberties and promote economic stability. The law of 22 Prairial, which had expedited the execution process, was repealed, and the revolutionary tribunals were reformed to ensure fairer trials. Political power shifted back to more moderate elements within the convention, leading to a period aimed to stabilize France and help heal the deep divisions caused by the revolution. The Reign of Terror left a profound and lasting impact on French society. Socially, it instilled a deep sense of fear and mistrust that lingered long after the guillotine fell silent. The period of mass executions and political purges decimated entire communities, leading to a climate of suspicion where neighbors turned against neighbors, often driven by personal vendettas masked as revolutionary zeal. The social fabric of France was irrevocably altered, with many families left mourning the loss of loved ones who'd been executed or imprisoned. Economically, the Terror disrupted daily life and commerce. The constant threat of arrest and execution paralyzed many aspects of business and agriculture. Revolutionary policies, including price controls and the requisitioning of goods, further destabilized the economy. The post-Terror period required significant efforts to restore economic stability and confidence. Psychologically, the impact on survivors was immense. The collective memory of the Reign of Terror became a source of national trauma. Public executions, often held in the town square, left indelible marks on those who witnessed them. The pervasive fear and psychological toll on individuals who lived through this period just can't be overstated. Many survivors carried the scars of this traumatic time, contributing to a collective memory that influenced French society for generations. The Reign of Terror provided a stark example of the use of terror as a political tool, influencing future revolutions and political movements. It demonstrated both the power and the dangers of radical political purges. The idea that terror could be justified as a means to achieve political ends was a lesson absorbed by later regimes and revolutionary movements. One notable comparison is the Stalinist purges in the Soviet Union during the 1930s. Like the Reign of Terror, Stalin's Great Purge used fear, arrests, and executions to eliminate perceived enemies and consolidate power. Similarly, the Cultural Revolution in China saw widespread purges, persecution, and social upheaval driven by ideological fervor. The Reign of Terror also influenced revolutionary movements in the 20th century, such as those in Cuba and Iran. These movements often looked to the French Revolution as a model, both for its successes in overthrowing entrenched regimes and its darker lessons on the use of violence and repression. Nobody is entirely sure how many people died during this bloody period. Records suggest that 17,000 were officially executed, while most would agree that several times that died unofficially, either while in prison or during violence far from the public eye. The Reign of Terror was a shocking period of state-sanctioned violence against its own people that followed a great moment of genuine hope after the French Revolution. Toppling one autocratic regime is all well and good, but beware of what comes next.